My name's Evan. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore and a mainstay of the San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Thanks for being here tonight as we launch Paul Madonna's new illustrated novel, Come to Light. A little bit about the store before we get started. Booksmith centers stories of the marginalized and underrepresented to create what we hope is an equitable place for everyone. Our store is open currently for limited browsing from 11 to 2 every day, and we're doing curbside pickup from 11 to 6. You can also shop online at booksmith.com anytime, of course, and we will deliver right to your door. We're offering free shipping throughout San Francisco and the East Bay right now. We're happy to be able to bring you a lot of our events virtually while we shelter in place to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. We've got a ton of events happening this month. Just a few coming up next week. On Tuesday, we've got Kendra Atlework with Alia Voles. They'll be reading from and discussing their new memoirs. On Wednesday, we are launching Tim Wang's new book, Subprime Attention Crisis. That's a partnership with the Internet Archive. On Thursday, we host Cory Doctorow for his new novel, Attack Surface. And then later in the month, we're hosting Rebecca Roanhorse with Charlie Jane Anders, Mike Precan and Michael War, Omnidon's fall book release, and many more events. You can find out more about them all at booksmith.com. But tonight, as I mentioned, we are of course here to celebrate the new book by Paul Madonna. It's called Come to Light. It's a 3-volume illustrated novel that, like all of Paul's work, is rendered beautifully. I have just the galley here with me. This is what the front looks like, but the packaging, maybe Paul can show it at some point, is really lovely. It's in 3 volumes, and the book is really fun to read. I'm enjoying it myself, and hope you all are too. So I'm going to say just a little bit about the book, and then have a conversation with Paul. You're all muted, obviously, and we ask that you please keep your videos off, but encourage you to show Paul some love in the chat. Say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, the chat is the place for that. Feel free to drop your questions at any point there, and we will have time for Q&A at the end of the program. We do have a 1 strike and you're out policy in the chat, which I think probably doesn't need saying, but I'm not a very discerning umpire, so please don't test me. If you're booted for making hateful comments or for anything that might be construed as trolling, you won't be able to come back in, so don't do that to yourself. With that, a little bit about the book. Come to Light is a fresh and original mystery with an unusual detective, Emit Hopper, a former rock star turned author and artist. 6 years ago, Emit's wife, Julia, went missing. Now the remains of her 2 hiking companions have been found buried in the California wilderness. But the discovery raises more questions than answers. So with his love for classic detective books and rye whiskey, Emit sets out across Europe chasing down clues, sketchbook in hand. If you'd like to purchase a signed copy of Come to Light, you can order directly from Booksmith, and I'll drop that link in the chat shortly. I also hear that Paul is open to doing personalized books. Is that true?
This is true.
It's true. So if you'd like one, please just be sure to include a note in the special field when you're checking out. I'll drop the link here in the chat now. You already know all you need to know about me. I'm the events manager at Booksmith. I frequently do other things. Paul Madonna, though, is an award-winning artist and writer whose unique blend of drawing and storytelling has been heralded as an all-new art form. He's the creator of the series All Over Coffee, which ran in the San Francisco Chronicle for 12 years, and the author of 5 books, including Everything is Its Own Reward, a winner of the 2011 NCBA for Best Book, and the Emit Hopper Mystery Series. Paul's work ranges from novels to cartoons to large-scale public murals and can be found internationally in prints as well as in galleries and museums, including the Oakland Museum of California and the William Blake Association in France. Paul is a founding editor for therumpus.net, has taught drawing at the University of San Francisco, and frequently lectures on creative practice. He holds a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University and was the first ever art intern at Mad Magazine. Also an inspiration of mine. Paul, so nice to be here with you tonight. Thanks for being here, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Evan. Nice to see you again. And I want to say thank you to everyone who showed up tonight, because, man, October is a hard month even when we're not in lockdown. I know of at least 2 other events tonight that I have friends in or people are doing. So, you know, I know that everybody's attention is being constantly pulled. So thank you for being here. I also want to say thank you to Booksmith, who is a fantastic bookstore and has been for the entire time I've known them. They have the great program of doing signed copies with local authors. So yeah, I'm happy to go up there and sign any books you guys want. It's good to be
Awesome.
here, Evan.
Thank you, thank you. I figured I would start off just by asking um, about your shift to illustrated novels. Oliver Coffey, obviously, you made pen and ink drawings of cityscapes with kind of short pieces of fiction, but the last three books of yours have also included longer narratives, and I'm wondering how you came to that evolution.
Yeah, thanks. You know what's interesting is for me it's very much a clean evolution. The novels are sort of Oliver Coffey times 1,000, because with the strip I was doing, and early on I would do a couple images and then one little conversation or piece of flash fiction. But you know, by the end, or at least the last 10 years of it, it was one drawing and one story. And after a while, I felt like that was one beat that I was doing, and I wanted to have them evolve. And there was always this relationship between the image and the text that was sort of abstract, and it was about the space in between the two of them. But for me, it was also what is the story of the image? And not just, oh, here's this house or this corner and what's going on there, but what is the atmospheric story? And so by telling longer form, it was a way to say, okay, I'm going to make a whole body of drawings. So maybe that's, 100 drawings of one style, or 5 bodies of 20 drawings in different styles. And then what is the story that's going on with all of those? And then to be able to tell this sort of deep narrative that I could take the reader along that journey of the images.
Awesome. And how has that changed the process for you? I'm so interested in your creative process just generally, and I imagine it's changed a little bit with that evolution.
Well, yeah, it has changed the process a lot, and that's been great for me because, after 12 years of publishing weekly, that routine and that schedule starts to get you into these creative habits. And I found for myself that I was repeating my habits. I especially, like, if we talk about the drawing specifically, I would be out scouting, and a lot of scouting for me is about light and shadow and not just the location. But I would find myself, driving down the street or walking, and I'd see a corner and it would be in this beautiful light, and I'd stop and be like, oh, I need to take a reference photo for that because I want to draw that. And then I'd stop and look at it and realize, while I hadn't drawn that corner, I'd essentially made that drawing before. It was like the same type of structure that I was drawn to, and the same hour of light, and I would even find myself standing in the same sort of relative position. And I realized that I needed to shake things up. In order to see differently, I needed to approach it differently. And so, especially for the first novel, I made a lot of drawings in the beginning that I threw out, because it was through the process of having to look at the world differently and discover what the character really was thinking. Like, what character was I writing, and why was I showing these drawings? And that's how I was able to make a shift to making, they're not totally different drawings, but they have a slightly different point of view. Mm-hmm. And it was a way to take myself on a different journey and sort of keep my eyes open.
Wonderful. I'm glad that you mentioned the reference photographs. I was going to ask. There's a point in the first book of Come to Light where Emit mentions something. I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, "I don't know how the plein air painters used to do it before they had reference photos. They must have had fantastic memories." I'm wondering if you have kind of a trick like that for writing. Do you imagine the scene and then write it? Do you make it up as you go? How does that work?
Oh, that's an interesting shift, like from talking about drawings to talking about writing. For the first book, I was really obsessive with, if I had an idea, I had to write it down, I had to get it in my notebook. And I was that way with Oliver Coffey. Like, anybody who knew me during those years, we could be in the middle of dinner and somebody would say something and I would just grab my notebook and write it down. It might not have anything to do with what they said, but it sparked an idea. And this book was really different there's something that Hemingway said. He talked about, like, he would stop writing at 12 o'clock noon, even if he was in the middle of a sentence. And he said, always walk away from the typewriter when you still have something to say. And we can all extract our meanings from that. But what I took from it is that by practicing that, if it was good, I wasn't going to forget it. And if anything, I was going to come back to writing the next morning, and I would have fleshed it out more in my mind without even knowing it. But you know, the great thing about doing long form is that you live in a story for 2 to 3 years, and you get to know it, and you get to know it in a way that it's almost like something that happened in your own life. And while memory is distorted, of course, there's almost more of a clarity that comes from living with that story, because you get to know the details and you go over them over and over again. And so a lot of times with this book, while I wrote a lot, I didn't write unless I really had worked it out in my mind. And so that allowed my active imagination to be ignited all the time. And it's still that way. You know, I've already started into books that's, you know, you finish a book, it's 6 months before it comes out at the very shortest. So, you know, what I find myself daydreaming about is the new story. And that daydreaming is like reviewing a memory, but it just gets a little clearer each time.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that you needed to kind of look at the work from a different perspective, or to approach the work from a different perspective. And I wanted to ask you what it's like. So the character Emit is an artist, and is taking on this detective work, and of course his drawings are staggered throughout the book in ways that illustrate the narrative. And so I'm wondering what it's like to embody, to make drawings or paintings as your character. Is that different? How is that different for you?
Yeah, what's great about it is that, especially with this book, so in order to answer that, I want to talk about illustrated novels for a second. What I wanted to do differently with this whole series was, if I was going to have drawings, just like Oliver Coffey, I didn't want those drawings to be, let's say the scene was, you know, there's 2 lovers in Paris having a meal in front of the Eiffel Tower at sunset, and you turn the page and there's a drawing of a table with, you know, glasses of champagne, the Eiffel Tower, and a sunset in the background. To me, that's redundant, and the reader doesn't need to see it, because the words have already given that image to them. But what can the drawings do that the text cannot? And so that was the question I wanted to answer for myself going into the book, and that's into all of these books. And that's why making the protagonist an artist, we could watch him drawing along the way. So while he's having these experiences and running down solving this mystery, he's actually drawing, and in his in-between times. So we're seeing the drawings he makes. And given what's going on, sometimes he's more stressed out, sometimes he's not. And in the really erratic times, his drawings start to break down. And so I thought to answer your question, I thought of myself as stepping into that character. I imagined as if I were an actor and I were shooting a film out of order, you know, and they said, okay, it's time to shoot scene 43 now. And I had to look at the script and say, well, emotionally, where's my character at? And be able to hit that beat so that when they put the whole film together, it showed an arc of the emotional experience. And so there were places that I would go and I'd say, okay, well, Emit is here. He's in, you know, the south of France, and his drawings, he's having a rough time. So his drawings need to be really loose, and they need to be breaking down a bit, because that's where he's at. And so it was really a fun thing to do, to say, that's what I need to do today. I need to draw like this today, not just make a drawing of where I'm at. And there were also places that I went like a year later to revisit, because the drawings I had made initially didn't necessarily have the right resonance. So I went back with that, saying, okay, this is where the character is.
Yeah, and so did you travel to specific places that you had in mind already for kind of the scenes of the book? How because the book Emit travels around quite a bit. Were these just places that you wanted to go, or places that you found yourself? Or
definitely places I wanted to go. I mean, you know, who sets a book in a place they don't want to visit, really? I mean, but you know, I set the last book in Asia, which is I had been wanting to do a project there for like 10 years before I got a chance to be able to return and do it. And then, so I wanted to set this book in Europe. And even though it picks up at the end of the previous one, he's in Asia, But you don't have to have read the previous book to read this one, and that was really important to me as well. But I wasn't sure the exact locations. I knew I wanted to do Rome because there was a historical reference from this series of paintings called the Flooding of Piazza Navona. And that was a reference that I wanted to use that ties into the narrative. So I knew the second volume he would end up in Rome, but otherwise the rest of it I wasn't sure. And in planning the book, I was offered a retrospective in the south of France. So that show was being put together, and I was being taken there for the summer and being put up. And I was like, well, great, I'm going to be in France, so I might as well make some work. So it was a great way to sort of tie in the opportunities I had and what I wouldn't necessarily have chosen to go to those villages specifically, but only because I didn't know them. So it was a way for me to learn a new place, meet new people, and make that work and tie it into the book. Now it also ends in Amsterdam, and that was really intentional because along the way, Emit is reading this 1970s Dutch crime writer, and he's referencing him throughout the book. And so he keeps saying, I want to end up in Amsterdam. So I really just had those two places, and I let the rest figure themselves out.
Very cool. So you mentioned that you had a show in France there, and that was part of the reason. In the book, Emit also has a show there, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, no, actually, he's invited to do the Venice Biennale.
It's in Venice, right?
And so that's kind of the whole premise is that he begins with he's making a new body of work that's going to be shown in the Biennale in like a year and a half from then. So, but then this whole series of events happens that sends his life into chaos. So he's simultaneously trying to use the work for the exhibition to have some sort of consistency and baseline. Like that's his stability in his life. He's like, I'm going to work for this exhibition, but yet everything else is going crazy, falling apart all around him. And then eventually, the work starts to fall apart too.
Well, what I'm wondering is, what is there a relationship? I know between you and Emit is where I want to go because I know for like Oliver Coffey, a lot of the text was overheard snippets, as you mentioned, whether they were actually overheard or imagined overheard in some cases, I think. Yeah, I know Emit has a backstory of being a rock star and becomes an artist, and I'm wondering if there's a parallel there, if you were in a band that I should know about and
or shouldn't know about, right? No, and that's the interesting thing about making a character that is also an artist, the sort of danger that'll be perceived as a thinly veiled self-portrait. And I have to say, with the first book, I was overly concerned with that, and I did these things with him that I was trying to make him so it would be obvious. I don't know, obvious to whom? So trying to be at least obvious to myself, like, no, that's not me at all. But the funny thing is, I think some of those choices weren't great choices because they didn't come off as realistic as they could have, and so I solved a lot of those this time, but also because I gave up worrying about it. He's not me. I'm not trying to portray myself through him, but in a way he's sort of an alter ego, right? Because I have to be able to step into his character and I have to be able to understand him. And then I could give him at least a lot of my own creative, like when he talks about drawing, it's me talking about drawing in a lot of ways. But and I don't know who it was, but an author once said, he's like, I love creating characters because my job is to run them up a tree and throw stones at them. And it's like, you do things to your characters, you put them in crazy situations and that, you never hope to be in. But there's also the giving him responses, the way he might react to something really becomes him. That's the real character. So it's like, I project myself and then allow it to take on a new persona. The him used to being a rock star, that was really, I love this idea of somebody's famous and then you never hear of them again. Like, and we all have that. It's like, whatever happened to that band? What are those people doing? You're like, are they stocking the shelves in the grocery store? Are they like running some aluminum factory now, like, and people go off and they do all this interesting stuff, whether it be within the creative field or anything, and have successful and happy lives, and sometimes not. But you know, that's where Close Enough for the Angels began, really, with this person who had this big career that everybody knew about, and then suddenly was gone. And that was what was fascinating about him to write about for that first book was, who is that guy? What kind of life does he have afterwards? And he has a really interesting life, and he also has a really interesting relationship with fame or celebrity, because I think after you go through something, and whether you're spit out the other side or you willingly exit the other side, you no longer have the same desires, or your desires take on a different form. And so that's something that's really, I really love playing with him, is, you know, giving him to work with, is that his relationship to how the world might perceive him. And he has a brother who is a twin brother who is an actor. So he's often mistaken for his twin brother, which has another level of that, because sometimes he's like, sure, I'm my brother, because then he gets to be, it's sort of a freedom. There's like an anonymity in that celebrity.
For sure. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about character development and how you do that. Since it's something so compared to Oliver Coffey, you know, you weren't really doing that at that time. How do you do it? Do you map folks out? You're kind of just daydreaming the whole scenario. How do you bring the people to life, and how do you evolve along with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. The mapping is all, I do a lot of plot mapping. That's creating that structure of what happens in the story, because it's one of the reasons I love writing mysteries, is because they have to be like clockwork. They're a mechanism, and what you set up in the beginning has to reveal itself, and it has to tie in a surprising way. And you know, you fall into a lot of cliche traps, and as a writer, you have to figure that out and get out of those and rewrite them and find ways to keep the reader engaged. And you know, I love details. It's like I see the stories as very similar to my drawings, and that I just need, as the more I understand them, the more I know how to draw them, the marks I need to make, or the sentences I need to write. So once I have the plot sketched out, and that's the thing that is, you know, I've got bulletin boards full of note cards that I'm working that stuff out, figuring out character. That's the fun of it, because it's how do people react in those situations, and it isn't always throwing stones at them, you know, and but it is putting them in situations where we get to test their character, because that's how character is made, right? Happy times do not really demonstrate who people are. It's always in stressful events or situations. So there's really, I'll think about it. I'll imagine, okay, well, what's that person going to do, and how are they going to react? So if anything, that's the real joy of it, is the development over time. And so to go back to Oliver Coffey, again, that was something that I would write these little scenes. And by the way, the overheard conversations, those were always fictionalized. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, people often thought they were true, which I just took to credit, you know, to my ability to write them that way. But I would start to write these little vignettes, and often I would see so much potential in them. And Emit Hopper was actually created in Oliver Coffey.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, really early on, I set up these scenes, and I wrote a couple of them over the course of a few years. That I made this young woman writer who would test people at a party, and she would say, "Oh, have you read Emit's new book? Oh, it's amazing," even though he didn't exist. But she'd do it to see if they would lie and say, "Oh yeah, I read that. That was amazing." And so I sort of created this fictional author that I gave to a fictional character. And so he was sort of a joke for me to return to. And that became fun, because then I began to imagine, who is that character? And what if he was actually real? So, you know, when I look back at my own progression, I can see how I teased various characters out of all those stories that I told. I mean, I published over 750 Oliver Coffey strips. You know, there was so many little vignettes that actually turned into larger scenes for books later on.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they're very rich little passages that kind of always struck me, and also just about how they always invite, maybe in part because they don't have the illustrations don't have humans in them, or cars in them. It makes it's like an invitation to project yourself into those scenes,
Right.
which I always did, and then kind of was like, oh well, this is a bigger world often, so that doesn't surprise me. I'm wondering why 3 volumes for this book?
Oh, that's great. There's one. It started off with something really practical, which is Close Enough for the Angels was like 520 pages. It's actually like almost exactly the same number of pages as this book, but we did it in with really heavy paper, beautiful paper, hardbound book, but it was just this tome, and I'm super proud of it. And I loved it. It's a nice object, but I realized that it's a hard. You don't throw that book into your bag and take it with you. Not that any of us go anywhere anymore, but back in the days when we went places and we carried books with us, and I would be out, and I realized the way that was reading is like, what did I grab that day? I might be reading 3 books, but I grabbed the one that was easiest to throw into my bag to take with me. And I was like, that's one of the nobody's just taking this book out to the park or to a cafe. And I was like, what am I reading? I'm reading a lot of just paperback detective novels. And so I thought, I want to make paperback detective novels, but I want to do it in a unique way. And so that was the very beginning of it. But then there was another part, which was that I wanted to do different type of drawings for this book. And while I wanted to do my pen and ink drawings that people know of mine and that they love and that I do enjoy doing, again, like I was saying before, I needed to see differently. I needed to break it up. And I was understanding how I could do more with this new form of illustrated novel where I'm involving the reader in the making of the drawings. And so I decided that I would do different drawings for each volume. So actually I'm going to do a screen share and take you through some of that.
Great.
Can you see the image on screen?
Yeah, it looks
Okay,
good.
great. So this first one is just showing you, so on the left, it's the box, and these are the 3 volumes. Oops, sorry. So these are 3 different covers, and you can see there's different type of drawing. The left is pencil. The center is it's ink and pen and ink, but color, and also the subject matter is really different. And I'll talk more about the subject matter in a moment. And then the third is sort of my more pen and ink style that people are familiar with. This is a drawing that I actually made for Oliver Coffey. It was the very beginning. I hadn't known that it was going to be part of this book yet, but it was one of the drawings that set me off on this book, because this is Gaudi, the park in Barcelona. And you know, the way that Gaudi works with nature, the line I came up with was order, chaos. And that really sparked a lot of this story, because that's the name of the first volume. And so I used this drawing as the entrance to why Emit would go to Barcelona. Again, the pencil drawing that I showed you from cover, this is actually in my patron's house in France, and who was putting me up for the retrospective, and his dog. But and it really the dogs are actually part of the story of that first volume. This is a really quick pen drawing from Rome, or actually, excuse me, from Florence. So now here's what I want to talk about with the process. This is from Lisbon, and this is where Emit, he says, I need to start over again. And so I would go out and just say, I'm just going to take pencil and sketchbook, and I'm going to make the fastest drawings I can. And it's interesting because I made a lot of drawings that didn't go into this book. And it was because I had to figure out, I had to sort of change the way that I was working, go back to the beginning and remember what it was like to just go out into the field and sketch and look at the world, but make different type of marks. This is from Cinque in Italy. So this drawing I want to show you, so 2 sets here. So this is from the south of France. So what I do in the book is, in the first volume is all the sketches, And in the third volume are all the finished drawings, because in the first volume, we're watching Emit make these drawings. And in the third, he's back in his studio and he's making finished drawings from his sketches. So this is the sketch and this is the finished drawing. And so I think it's really fun to show the reader, because I can't make these finished drawings on site while I'm traveling. So it forced me to do a different type of process to get from this drawing to this drawing than I would in San Francisco. And then this next set is, I think maybe just the best drawing in the entire book. And this is from Rio Maggiore, which is Cinque Terre in Italy. And I included 3 versions of it here. This is the first sketch I did while being on site. And you talked about taking the people out. What you don't see here are about 8,000 people, tourists. This is sunset, all crowding around, actually kind of annoyed that I'm standing there drawing, because they're all there trying to take pictures. This is the pen work. Now this original drawing is 4 by 5 feet. And then here's the ink wash. And it's, it was really fun to know that I would be doing this with that sketch. And I did a handful of sketches from various places for knowing that I'd be doing a really large, intricate drawing. And you asked me about the volume. So volume 2 is you saw the drawing of the cover. And one of the really cool things I wanted to do here is include artwork that wasn't my own, because I was drawing a lot of sculptures, and I was also I talked about the flooding of Piazza Navona, and that series of paintings features in the book as well. So I actually have several of those which are royalty free that I was able to use and reproduce. But I wanted there to be another artist character in the book who made work, and then have Emit draw those pieces. So I was thinking about it. At first I thought that I would make the pieces, but then I realized they shouldn't be mine at all. And a friend of mine, Diane Hoffman, who is an assemblage artist in San Francisco, who I've adored her work for years. I know that when she makes her pieces, she likes to begin with a story. She'll often begin with a narrative and then sort of work in character. So I went to her and I said, all right, well, I've got this character, and this is how this character works and what their story is. And I was sort of fleshing out that story. And I said, I want you to make a body of pieces from this character, and then I'm going to draw them. I'm going to show you a couple of these. So this was one of Diane's pieces, and this is just set up in my studio, because I'll show you more in a second. And here's the drawing I made for it. Now, the interesting thing there, talking about how I had to adjust my drawing style, to even like doing the sketches, had to loosen up and just say, all right, don't worry about type marks. When I was drawing Diane's pieces, I had to do the opposite. I had to draw the tightest that I could, because the first couple of drawings I made, they weren't working, because they just looked like my drawings of somebody's art. But I really wanted her work to come through. I wanted you to see her sculpture before you saw my drawing of it. And so it was the exact opposite of that sketch, where I had to go really tight. I'm going to go back to that image where you can tell it's not exact, but it's really close. And I think that the mood of her piece, I hope that the mood of her piece comes through. And here's an example of, I'd set up her piece, I'd light it in my studio, and just be as fine as I could with rendering it. And it was really fun, especially like to get the textures and to get the colors, and to have to think about making a different type of drawing, because the drawing, again, was not about the drawing, it was about her sculpture, and then it was Emit drawing her sculpture. And then I talked about the flooding of Piazza Navona, and read the book so you can find out more about like the history of that is in the book. And it's cool because Emit goes to Navona, right? And then the place factors into the story. Okay, I'm gonna exit out of there.
I was actually going to ask you if the sculptures were by Diane. So
oh, did you recognize them as hers?
I did actually. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm a fan of hers too, and is kind of the only artist making this kind of work that I really know. Or follow at least. So you certainly captured it enough for it to come out to me. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And so that was a really long answer, which I know I'm good at, but of saying why 3 volumes, because it started really practical, but then it was also a way for me to say, how can I present 3 really different type of books? Because the fun of it too is, 3 covers, the 3 sets of end pages, and so I got to design 3 different books plus a box while making this. So so there was a lot of fun to be able to provide visuals.
It wasn't enough work to do 1 book for 1 book.
No, of course not. Yeah, it's too easy to do 1 anymore, right? But then, there's what I love is, hopefully one day when we're going somewhere other than our living room and bedrooms, you grab one of these and you can put one of these books in your bag and you can take it with you. And so it was a way that I could do a 520-page book and still make it really portable.
Do you have influences for the illustrated novel concept? I remember when we were talking about it some 10 years ago, and you were starting to have this idea. I'm wondering, this form does, it seems like you're pushing the envelope some to me, and I'm just wondering if there are reference points that you have, or how kind of you've developed the idea to integrate the images in the way that you have.
Well, thank you for saying that I'm pushing the envelope, because that's really one of the things I'm trying to do in terms of form or genre. Because no, there's no real influences for exactly this style, and maybe that's the point. Is that I kept looking at all the illustrated books that were contemporary books that were being made, and what I liked. Some of them worked in different ways. Myra Kalman, I think, does maybe the best job. Like Principles of Uncertainty is one of my favorite books, and and that was back when I was doing All Over Coffee, and I felt like in a way, she was doing something parallel to what I was doing, how we were just creating images and text. But in terms of story and narrative, no, I don't know anyone who's doing it quite this way, and it's because what I felt wasn't working. Like illustrated novels were really made because there was a successful book, and then the publisher would hire an illustrator to make some drawings so that they could then make a color edition and sell it for more money. I think it was very rare, in the early days, to launch a book that nobody knew about with illustrations. It was only the advent of cheaper printing that allowed that to flourish. And this is just my own personal opinion, but I think it has faded away over the years because we're bombarded with images now. We have so many images on our phone, on everywhere, that to see drawings in an illustrated novel kind of take away from it. Again, that idea of turning the page and seeing the couple at Paris and the Eiffel Tower in the background, you had a picture of it in your mind that if the prose was good enough, it brought to life. But you brought a lot to it as well. Whether you had been there yourself or you'd always dreamed of, and even if it was a film you'd seen or something, you did have a picture. And if you saw somebody else's picture, well, it limited your imagination. And so I didn't want to address that really at all. So, Emit is never like, here is the picture of exactly what I'm looking at, unless he's telling you he's sitting there drawing. But it's not, this is what's happening in a scene. You're really sort of paying attention to his experience as a creative person. So they become 2 parallel narratives, and it becomes the story of the drawings. And I think that that's what I did even more robustly in this book is, again, the volumes. We see him making pen and ink drawings, and we see them breaking down to sketches. We see him making drawings of Diane's work, and then we see him coming back to his studio and making big, robust drawings later on. And that all runs along with the other narratives that are going, the mystery narrative. So my hope is that it's really just addressing it in a completely different way.
Yeah. You say, or I should say, Emit says that a few times in book 1, at least, that he's kind of been stuck in his life since Julia's disappearance and not moving on, and he uses the art to kind of push his life forward, his own narrative. That's for him to show is a kind of way to try to relaunch what he's doing. And I'm wondering if this evolution of form, if you found that to be the case for you as well. what's the next direction? You're working on the Emit Hopper series, yeah? And
Yeah, we were talking about character earlier, and the more I got to know him, the more I wanted to write about him.
mhm,
And, even as I was finishing up the first book, I didn't know that I would do anymore. I hadn't had any intentions, but it was actually during one of the final drafts, and I write about this in the afterword of Come to Light, the final drafts of Close Enough for the Angels, I had this flash of Emmet years later. And it's one of the scenes in the book. And it was what set off the whole second volume is that one image I had. And I realized, oh, he has a light, like I kind of know what happens to him afterwards. And that made me end the book differently. I changed the ending completely because I thought, oh, this is part of something bigger now. And that got me really excited. This idea that I was world building, and that I could put all these little pieces out that would form a life, really, But you asked about, is it the same way for me of, and I think that any creative person, it is a little bit like I use my work to propel me into the future, to give me, I mean, as trite as it sounds, but like to give me hope, because if, hope is essentially you can imagine tomorrow and tomorrow's good, right? And so, when, especially writing long form, one assumes they're going to finish it. And that's what's funny. It's like, Murakami said something great. He's like, whenever I start writing a new book, I just hope I get to the end of it. I'm alive to get to the end of it. And there is some of that, just like, I'll be alive and kicking, and everything will be good in 3 years, and we'll finish this and put that out. And so there is this, you sort of use it as your own like carrot at the end of the stick to chase after.
yeah.
And I wouldn't say that I use it in the same way that I gave it to Emmet. I give it to him as like, it's really all he has left. And he's sort of burned out, but he's scratching in the dirt, hoping to, kick up some sparks to then catch fire and then turn into something greater.
For sure. Is it in that way kind of like the way that you worked on like the Oliver Coffee and Small Potatoes, even a serial just without the deadline? Do you think of it in a parallel way?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I do, because one of the things I started doing with Oliver Coffee was, I would work in batches, and I got really good at this after a few years, because I think there's nothing more crazy making than make a piece, turn it in for deadline, and then start over. I mean, it's a little like, that would be like COVID. It's just like, yep, same today as it was yesterday. And talk about falling into creative repetition. So I would work on like anywhere from 4 to 12 pieces at a time, and I would finish bodies of Oliver Coffee pieces. And that's something that would be really cool. It's I think that comes from being a painter, and you work on themes and you make a whole body of paintings, and then you have an exhibition. You sort of have a clearing, and then you start another body, and you might be responding off of that. So I did a lot of that with Oliver Coffee, because I might finish those 10 pieces, turn them in. So now I had 2.5 months before I had to worry about another weekly deadline. So it was a way of sort of fooling myself. And then some of those pieces I could work on for that entire 10 weeks. I could make a big drawing that took me 10 weeks to make, and then some that took me 2 days to make. And then when I turned in the next batch, there was sort of this like, wow, how did you do one of those in a week? Well, I didn't, because I figured out a different process. So maybe in that way it is similar, because setting out in the novel, it's the same way. You're writing and drawing. It just don't have those milestones, which are more challenging. And so travel helps me with that a lot. Like, oh, well, I'm leaving. If I'm leaving town, then I have to have X done. Or I'm in this place for 2 months. I have to come out of here with this chapter written and these drawings made.
Mm-hmm. Would you, that makes me think of Emmet with his 3 phones and trying to figure out, who should he book the flight, for being
right, because he's under aliases.
Exactly. What was that like for you? I imagine that's not the kind of juggling that you typically have to do, but maybe I don't know you as well as that.
No, this persona. No, I have, as far as I know, I haven't gone under any aliases. No, it was fun. Again, creating a character, and he did it because he's in that situation. And that's that's the cool thing, because what are the choices that somebody needs to make? And what, you know, if I make myself laugh, or if I find it clever, I have to find it enjoyable. Like just solving the creative problem isn't enough. It's like I have to project and say, well, what if I read this? Would I think that that was an interesting turn? Or, you know, what excites me? What gets me to turn the page? And, you know, it's interesting because I do drawings and there's so many elements to putting a book like this together. We don't talk as much about plot, which is fine. But, you know, I do want to say that it's so important to me that it be an engaging story, and that it keeps people reading, because it doesn't matter how many beautiful drawings are in there. If the story isn't good, no one's going to finish it, you know? And I want them to get to the end, and I want them to be satisfied and be surprised. And so that's why, I mean, you know, you have a lot of readers along the way. You have editors, you have people who will be frank and be like, that was kind of cheesy. You know, you might want to solve that. Or, and then one last thing I want to say about like place too. Like I had Emit going to places. I have drawings from places that I ended up cutting out completely, because I realized that wasn't part of the important in the narrative. He didn't, it was like, okay, well, yeah, sure, I'd love to show those drawings, but the story didn't need it. And so at the end of the day, you've got to have that really critical editor's eye and say, well, what is that through line? There's a story I'm telling here, and everything else is in service of that story. And so that's why, you know, there are dozens more sketches and other finished drawings that just didn't go in. And I like that. I like that there's beautiful stuff on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. I was going to ask if there's you know, a journal of unpublished Emit Hopper drawings or something that might be found out in the world in some other capacity.
Well, you know, that actually gives me opportunity down the line to say, like, be able to use that stuff in a different way, and maybe use that as a launch to tell another story. And so that's where they can feed off of each other, right? Like I said, you know, showing the Gaudi drawing hadn't initially been made for Emit, but I liked it. I was like, okay, well, that's a reason to tie in Barcelona, because he needed to go somewhere, right? And if I was going to choose a place, and I had something to already as an entrance for me, so I could feed off of the story and then also feed off the drawings.
Awesome. I want to just pause and say, encourage you guys who are tuned in, if you have any questions for Paul, feel free to ask anytime. I know he'll have a good answer for you.
Or at least a long babbling one. I haven't even looked at the messages. There are people drinking, and drinking whiskey while during this is quite appropriate, because Emit drinks a great deal of whiskey throughout this book.
Yeah. And I take it that you're a whiskey guy.
These days I am, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm not much of a Scotch person. I've begun to enjoy it a bit, I will admit. But I really give him this, like, just that he hates Scotch and that he just rails on it. And that's one of the fun things too, is, you know, you get to give a character this sort of like exaggerated points of view or something, and not, it's, you know, it's not a political point of view. It's nothing polarizing. It's just something that makes him who he is.
Yeah, I enjoy Emit really talking shit about Scotch. It's
Are you in that camp as well?
What's that?
Are you in that camp as well?
No, it's funny. I actually like Scotch a lot, which for some reason that just tickles me that this character just can't stand it. But I also share his love for instance, when Basil Hayden's gets mentioned, I got very excited. That was my whiskey of choice for a while, so my bourbon of choice, I should say.
Sometimes I think of as like bourbon and rye as being sort of like the kids' version of Scotch. You know, like the adults drink Scotch, right? So. And Emit's kind of a big kid in a lot of ways, right? He has a real life, but he kind of, you know, he's got this crazy artist life, and so which sort of exists in this different realm. And you know, I want to say too, that was something that I noticed in crime fiction, because I read a lot of it, and I try to read crime fiction from around the world and all eras, and there's never been an artist protagonist. You know, we've had all different sorts of amateur sleuths. And lots of the like accidental detectives, which is what Emit is, right? He's not setting out to be to solve crimes. He just has these things that embroil him. And I thought it's really fun if I can create within the pantheon of amateur detectives an artist. That's really fun.
Very cool. So it looks like we have a question here from Eric. Eric's asking, you mentioned Myra Coleman as an illustrated novel influence. Who are some of your prose influences, and how do you think influences appear in this book?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that prose-wise, it's more about form, about how they write. It's Raymond Chandler. I mean, if anybody, it's a big noir fan, they tend to be a Raymond Chandler fan. What I love about Chandler is, like, in every one of his books, he has a scene that is just so moody and so evocative. But he was also very, terse in his writing style. That's where in that era of hard boiled, right? That's clipped. But I mean, it was also the personality, but it was the writing style. I mean, Hemingway, huge for like that short writing style, and keep your sentences clean and to the point, and think about the spaces in between. Who was it? I hate when I have somebody in mind and I actually can't think. Who wrote Black Dahlia? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't.
I mean, he's written so many wonderful books, but James Ellroy. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. I just saw in the chat. So James Ellroy was actually a huge influence in terms of my writing style, because I read, he was talking about one of his books that it went something like 10,000 words over 20,000 words, something like a lot over what the publisher wanted. And so they wanted to cut a whole section of the book. But instead, what he went in and he went into every sentence, and he just deleted words that he said, well, these words don't need to be here, like prepositions or something. So sometimes his sentences they're grammatically correct, but they're just kind of chunked together. And it creates this form, sort of like, it's like Hemingway's been up all night for like 12 days, like a little bit. And then he got those 10,000 words out, but still got to tell his story. And when you start to feel that clipped rhythm and you get into it, you don't miss the missing words. And I don't know that I achieved that level, because I don't want his voice. I wanted my voice. And my voice is very colloquial, because this book is first person present tense, so I needed to find Emit's voice is along with mine, but those were the people I think that had the most influence on this novel specifically.
Awesome. Thanks for that question, Eric. We've got a question from Charles. What details do you look for in developing a sense of place in your images? Are those details the same for how you approach establishing setting in prose?
Interestingly, I think the details for the drawings, I didn't try to change my perspective. I talked about, like, when finishing Oliver Coffey and realizing, I've essentially done that drawing before. I allowed myself to stand in the same places, let's say, for doing the finished drawings for this book, because I felt like I was tearing down so many other things. I was tearing down the drawing style and, working in many different materials. And, Diane's maybe was the most where I had put myself in a different point of view. But in terms of the approach for establishing setting in prose, I always establish setting by where is the character and how's the character entering that scene. And I really dislike, I don't describe a scene very much. Anytime I'm going to do that, I'll say, well, I'm going to do that in a drawing. I want that mood. Let the drawing give that mood, because I don't want to describe the light. And if I do, it's somehow relating to the drawing. I try to really, I give as few details as possible, because I want the reader to fill them in. But I need to give you some sense of place. And again, I think giving you a few drawings is a lot to fill in all those gaps. But I do think of my stories as being similar to the drawings. Like they overall, they feel the same to me. I don't know if that's true for the reader as well, though.
So we have a question from Linda. You said you read a lot of detective novels. Are there any specific ones that helped inspire Emit?
Well, I mean, in terms of his character, not necessarily, but there's a author that he's reading Van de Wetering, which is the Dutch author I talked about from the 1970s, who writes these really interesting crime books that, and I think there are 14 of them, and about halfway through the series, they start to get really punchy, like almost comical, and his character names they're really funny, and there's all these like hilarious scenes. But what's great is like nobody ever gets mad, nobody ever like goes on these tirades. Even the criminals, wow, they get caught and they're like, oh, I'm caught, and then the cops are leading them away, and they're like, why did you do that stupid thing? And I'm oversimplifying it, but they're really enjoyable to read, and they have a sense of reality to them too, because he's really writing about Amsterdam in the 70s, and there's a lot of like cultural references that put you in the book. And so I gave him to Emit. Emit is reading him the entire time, and so that was a huge influence. And so I made sure to read all the Van de Wetering novels while I was writing this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love how Emit is carrying those books around or shipping them to other locations for when he returns.
Yeah,
the little subplot. Any other questions? Drop them in the chat, you guys.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question. This is kind of maybe first a placement question. I'm wondering, I know, so Close Enough for the Angels that's the first book in the Emit series.
Yeah.
And then this is the second.
Yeah.
And then how many books is it? Do you know that, or is it?
Oh, in the series?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't mind not knowing.
Sure.
And interestingly, like he references Close Enough for the Angels. Mm-hmm. Because, and I don't really want to give away why, but there's something very meta that happens with him talking about having written that book and the things that happened in it. And so people keep asking me like, oh, I haven't read the first one. Should I read the first one? And I think it really doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Like you really don't have to know anything about that book to read this one. And I'm interested to talk to people, like if you read the second one first and then you go back and read the first one, it's going to have a different understanding, and then vice versa. And both are, I think, really, they inform each other. So that's what we do as readers too. Oftentimes when I find authors, they've got like 6 books already or something, I'm like, how have I never heard of these people? And that's great, because now I have 6, and maybe I dove in at their latest one, and then I start in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And what's wonderful is if you go back to the beginning, you see the seeds that they didn't yet know about their characters or even their writing style that then bloom and turn in. And then you, after a while, you'll start to see them planting stuff because they know, oh, I'm going to write another book. And so then they plant little things for themselves to 2 books down the line they can pick up. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to do some of that in this book as well. Like there was some backstory stuff that I put in here that helped his character. And I'm like, well, that's great. That's an entire book if I want to write that. Mm-hmm. And so I would come up with all these ideas. And so it's like, great. If, at any point I can just decide what is the next one I want to tell, or if it's never told, then so be it.
Very cool. I'm also wondering, just out of curiosity, as you're working on this illustrated novel, I imagine you're doing other visual art, other visual works. What's that like? Do you find that your different projects inform one another? Is it just like a totally different mind space that you enter, or how does that work? Yeah,
it's a different mind space, and I like that because we all need breaks, and breaks are sort of things that help me. If I have a problem to solve, the best thing to do is to take a break. I mean, it took me a lot of years to learn that, and maybe it will change again. But I can tell you, when I was writing Close Enough for the Angels, if I hit a plot problem, I would just sit down and try to write my way through it. And there were times I would throw out weeks of writing, but it was because I felt like, oh, if I don't work, then, oh my God, it's going to fall apart. Whereas I would hit a plot problem with this book and be like, I'm going to go, work on this other project. And, I did things like I did Anchor Steam's beer label last year. That was a really fun project and took a lot of work to scout and get, and I did a handful of like mural projects and lots of commissions. So things that, would put me in a different state of mind, and also would be one-offs. You're like, okay, I have a problem to solve here for this project. I need to do this 40-foot mural. And so it would be great because if I felt like I needed a break, I would just step away from it, go work on something else. And then it might come to me and I'd make a few notes or keep it in my head. And then when it was time to go back and work on that book, I could. Now, I also want to say that the shifts between drawing and writing provide those same, being able to walk away. Because I wouldn't draw and write in the same day a lot of times. I might take 2 weeks and I'm just writing and I'm like, okay, I got my way through that, put it aside, now go work on that body of drawings, take a couple weeks. And so that automatically gave these mental shifts as well.
Very cool. We've got another question here from Vene. Would you consider virtual teaching illustration, writing, storytelling? And also, do you ever draw digitally?
I'll answer the last one first. I have not drawn digitally, but it's interesting. This book really did open me up and sort of broke a lot of my habits that I wanted to be broken. Like I intentionally wanted to break them. And, before I would have been like, no, there's no need to do that. But now, it really, I'd be great because I'm like, why not? Why not just do a whole body of drawings digitally to see what comes out? And they don't have to be for a specific project. And that's important too, I think, when you're stripping things down, is it can't be like, well, I've got to put this here and it's got to be for this reason. No, so you just have to make work for the sake of making work. And then it'll influence no matter what, right? Like working is always good. In terms of teaching, I have taught, I haven't done any virtual teaching. So I'm not sure how that would go. I mean, sure. I mean, I'm open to things. Why not? If someone's going to offer me a job teaching, I'll give it a shot.
I was kind of wondering if you were doing like class visits or anything like that now. I know digital learning has been obviously virtual learning has been this sudden thing that we've all needed to embrace, I think, or a lot of people have needed to embrace. And I think some teachers are trying to get creative in how they are having to get creative in how they teach their coursework. So I imagine that would be a boon to some classes.
Yeah, I do think it would be challenging. I don't have a ton of teaching experience, so I don't know that I could pivot as easily as professional teachers. I think when I think about materials, and just and the act of being in a room with a group of people who are making drawings and able to hold them up and show each other, and just that tactile, to be able to talk about how the brush feels on the paper, or how much water or how wet the medium is, or just all those different elements. When I taught, I would bring in a stack of different papers and just be like, let's look at these, feel these, and imagine, and make some marks on these things. And so, I mean, I'm sure it's doable. It's just I think that would be a challenge for something so tactile.
For sure. So we have another couple questions. One is, do you have any advice for a later in life illustrator?
Well, I think, later in life can have two elements. On one, you can be really set free from all the expectations of when you're young and like, oh, I need to make a living at this, or I need to do all these things. But it can also, I think, if you are trying to do it professionally, one of the challenges can be the knowledge of how much exists out in the world and how hard it is to get noticed. I think in a way, my ignorance and my naivete of being young helped me, because if I understood, and I'm sure I don't understand it all even now, right? But if I understood even what I know now about how hard it is to make it in the marketplace and to get seen, it might have been overwhelmingly crushing. So the ignorance of that and the sort of cockiness that comes with youth, of being like, of course I can make this work, that served me then. And but I think on the other hand, some people, like, you can be in a place where you're like, no, I've done things in my life that I want to do, and now I just want to learn this. You can be set free of all of it and do it for the sake of doing it, and find the joy in making mistakes. I mean, it's all about making mistakes. I mean, you make 1,000 mistakes before you make one thing. You're like, that's wonderful, and then you screw it up, and you're like, well, that was wonderful, and so you start over again. And in a way, there is something holding you back when you get good at something, like, or get known for it, like getting known for the pen and ink style, or getting known for the way of writing in All Over Coffee. You know, you try to change that, and you've got to confront people's expectations of you, and then also your expectations of what the world is giving to you. You get used to being fed from oh, I like this, or I'm selling this number of pieces or this number of books or whatever, and then you make something new, and people are like, oh, I like the other stuff. Or then you've got new people who are like, oh, that's amazing. You have to be willing to be like, well, it changes, so you just got to let it go, and that's an emotional experience you have to be having that's aside from the creative experience, and setting those two apart can be a challenge. So, you know, like coming into the studio, and there are days when I have to get things done. That's one type of work. Then there are the days I come in, I don't know what I'm going to do today. And that's leaving the world outside and just coming in here to work. Mm-hmm. And then somebody asked about Mad Magazine, right?
Yeah, what, if anything, stays with you to this day about your experience at Mad Magazine?
It was integral into forming what I'm doing today, because first thing, I walk into Mad and I expected to meet all those artists that I, you know, grew up reading and loved. There wasn't an artist in sight. And they were like, this is an editorial magazine. This is just, you know, here's the editorial staff. And I came to meet the artists who would come in, and we'd go to parties or whatever, but they really got me to understand how the magazine worked, and how telling stories with drawings, it's the writing. And that's what the editors, they were like, everything begins with the writing. You have to know your story first. And it was so obvious once they told me. And that's when I began, you know, I would do layouts. Like I did layouts for Mort Drucker for his movie parodies. And I would get the script from the writer. And my job was to lay out the text bubbles, which Mort then had to draw around. And it was so the opposite of how I thought. And from then on, I was like, well, story comes first. Everything I do. So even All Over Coffee, 95% of the time, it was written before I would do a drawing. And, you know, I don't know if that's apparent to the reader or not, especially because the drawing featured so prominently in All Over Coffee. But that Mad Magazine gave me that perspective. And I think in a way, that's why it's turned into novels, because I'm still thinking about story. And why am I doing these drawings? Oh, what's the story of the drawings? And then it turns into that, how do I work? So, you know, it's like a hierarchy of thought.
Thanks, Mad Magazine.
Thanks, Mad Magazine. Who can actually say, thanks, Mad Magazine, you made my life better?
Oh, I think there's plenty of people out there who could say that.
Yeah.
But thank you, Paul. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Nice to see you.
Yeah, always good to talk to you. And thank you all so much for tuning in. If you don't have the book, you should buy it, and you should get it from Booksmith. Here's the link. We have signed copies, and Paul will be happy to personalize them for you. Just make a note when you're checking out. Hope to see you in real life sometime. But
absolutely.
Until then, take care and stay well. Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.